How does an airline with no jets become the first to launch the jet age for American domestic air travel? In the late 1950s, the race was on to bring the speed and glamour of jet travel to the American public. But while giants like Pan Am had fleets of brand new Boeing 707s, one smaller airlines, National Airlines, had the bold and almost unbelievable plan to beat them to the punch, using their own planes against them. This is the story of how one airline's faked it till you make it, and in doing so, kicked off a new era of aviation in the United States. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. My name is Jim. This is AeroExploration, and it's been a while, so let's dive into another installment of aviation history. Imagine the world, if you will, in the 1950s. Air travel is connecting the world through roaring, vibrating piston-powered machines that kind of lumber through the sky. A trip from New York to Miami, for instance, was long and it was a noisy affair. It was the early days of commercial air travel, but this was pretty slow. On the horizon, however, a new sound was emerging. Not a roar, but a scream. The scream of a jet engine. This new technology promised to shrink the continent and turn long-haul slogs into short hops, and thus redefine the very concept of travel for us. Now, this concept doesn't sneak up on the airlines by surprise. Every airline in the United States knew that the future was going to be jet-powered. The first to offer this revolutionary service to the American public wouldn't just gain passengers, but they'd seize the moment. The problem, however, is jets were monumentally expensive, and only the biggest and most powerful airlines could afford the gamble to put them in the sky. The undisputed king of the sky at the time was Pan American World Airways. They had a stake in its empire through the new Boeing 707 and ordered a massive fleet to dominate the international skies. On October 26, 1958, they did just that. They launched the first American-operated jet service from New York to Paris. So this is a route that over time would continue on, but they would add a refueling stop in Gander, Newfoundland. The jet age had arrived, but it was mostly an international affair. The domestic race, however, the race to fly jets within America, was still on. And everyone assumed one of the giants, American, United, TWA, would win that race. But no one was looking at National Airlines. This was a plunky carrier known for flying sun-seeking tourists from the cold Northeast to the warmer beaches of Florida. National had no jets, though. They had none on order that would arrive in time to be the first. They were, for all intents and purposes, a spectator in this race to the future. Yet on December 10th, 1958, just 6 weeks after Pan American's historic international flight, National Airlines shocked the world by launching its first domestic jet service in the United States, flying from New York to Miami. So again, no one's looking at them. So how did they do this? They didn't build a better jet. They didn't have some secretly developed technology of their own. They pulled this off by one of the most audacious, clever, and downright cheeky business deals in aviation history. The promise of jet power wasn't new. The British had been first with the de Havilland Comet in 1952. The Comet was a revelation, sleek, futuristic, and eerily quiet inside. It flew higher and faster than any airline before it. So for a moment, it seemed Britain would own the jet age. This triumph was soon overshadowed by a series of horrific and mysterious in-flight disasters. The comets were literally falling from the sky. An intense investigation revealed a terrifying new problem: metal fatigue. The stresses of high-altitude pressurization were causing some catastrophic failures. And with that, the Comet is grounded, and the world has learned a brutal lesson about the perils of being first. The Comet's tragedy, however, proved a crucial, if grim, learning opportunity for the American manufacturers. Two giants were vying to build America's first successful jetliner: the Douglas Aircraft Company and a tenacious up-and-comer from Seattle, Boeing. At the time, Boeing is dominating the military aircraft space, but they've always played second fiddle to Douglas when it came to civilian markets. So they decided to bet the entire company on a new jet prototype. That jet would take the form of the Boeing 367-80, better known as the Dash 80. In 1958, during a demonstration flight over Lake Washington, test pilot Tex Johnson pulled off a stunt that became the stuff of legends. In front of a crowd of airline executives, he put this massive 4-engine prototype into a graceful but gut-wrenching barrel roll. Twice. So the purpose of that, while his bosses at Boeing nearly had a heart attack, the message to the world was now clear. This is not a fragile machine. This specific jet was strong, reliable, and ready. So from the Dash 80 emerged the Boeing 707. The wings of this aircraft were swept back to a sharp 35-degree angle, and it was a design borrowed from military fighters that would allow it to slice through the air at nearly 600 miles per hour. This aircraft had 4 powerful Pratt & Whitney JT3C turbojet engines. These engines were far more simple and reliable than the monstrous piston engines that they were replacing. There's more room inside the aircraft as well. The cabin was wider and it allowed for 6 abreast seating that would become the industry standard. A flight that once took 8 hours could now be done in 5. The Boeing 707 wasn't just a new plane, it was a time machine, and every airline knew that they wanted to have one. In this high-stakes game of commercial aviation, 2 players now stand out. We start with the Titan, Pan American World Airways. This wasn't just an airline, it was an institution. They had methodically built a global network, pioneering routes across the Pacific and the Atlantic, when such feats were considered borderline impossible. When the jet age had dawned, the airlines saw it as their destiny. In a move of breathtaking corporate bravado, they placed a monumental order for both the Boeing 707 and its rival, the Douglas DC-8, for a total of $270 million, a sum that would be in the billions in today's money. This was a gamble that forced the hand of the entire industry. By ordering from both companies, Pan Am would ensure they would be first, no matter who built the better aircraft. Boeing would be to deliver, and on August 15, 1958, Pan Am received its first 707-121. Just over 2 months later, on October 26th, Pan Am's Clipper America inaugurated the first American-operated jet service with a transatlantic flight from New York to Paris. While Pan Am is off to the international races, they do have one major vulnerability. By law, Pan Am was almost exclusively an international carrier. The all-powerful Civil Aeronautics Board, or CAB, had consistently denied Pan Am the right to build a domestic network. This meant that Pan Am's shiny new jets could only fly you to London or Rome, but not to Chicago or Los Angeles. This is where the second player of the story is going to enter the stage, National Airlines. Compared to these global powers of Pan Am and other airlines, National was just a regional power. It was founded in 1934, and it had steadily grown into a major player on the U.S. East Coast. This lucrative air corridor would funnel millions of travelers from the cold Northeast to the sunny warmth of Florida. Now, by the end of 1958, National Airlines had a bit of a problem. The jet age had arrived, and they were on the verge of being left behind. The rivals like Eastern Airlines had their own jets on order. American Airlines was prepared to launch its own 707s on transcontinental routes earlier the next year. Now, National had ordered the new DC-8s, but those planes were still months, if not years, away from delivery. In this fast-paced world of aviation, a year might as well be an eternity. So they faced the prospect of flying half-empty propeller planes against their rivals' fancy new jets. For National, this was a recipe for corporate extinction. They needed a jet, and they needed it now. They couldn't just go buy another one. They couldn't have another one built. So they decided to do the next best thing. Rent them from one airline that had plenty to spare. So National was facing this stark reality, and they knew that they were about to be technologically eclipsed. They knew that they had to be the first airlines to advertise jet-powered service to Florida, or they would lose that winter travel season. The question was, how do you get a jet when there just aren't other jets to be had? Well, the answer was audacious, counterintuitive, and, well, kind of brilliant. The target was Pan American. All right, so at first glance, this idea is absurd. Why would the world's most powerful airline offer to help the smaller and domestic competitor? So let's take a look at things from Pan Am's perspective. They've got this fleet of brand new 707s, but they were built for long-haul international flights. So a flight to Europe can take 7 or 8 hours, but the plane would spend hours on the ground, sometimes half a day or more, in Paris or London or New York before the next return trip. An airliner on the ground isn't exactly an asset. It's kind of a liability. These aircraft only make money when they're in the air. and their accountants were starting to see that idle hours on the tarmac in New York was a wasted revenue potential. So let's take a look at National's primary route. New York to Miami was a relatively short hop, about 2 hours and 15 minutes by jet. The 707 could fly from New York to Miami, spend a short time on the ground, and then fly right back in less time than it had sat idle between the transatlantic voyages. So suddenly, leasing a jet to National isn't about helping their competitor. It's all about asset utilization and making money off of their aircraft. But this deal is far more complex than just a simple rental situation. It was tied to a much larger prize for Pan Am, a stock swap. If approved by the Civil Aeronautics Board, this would give Pan Am a significant and potentially controlling voice in National's affairs. This could be the answer to the long sought-after path of domestic market for Pan Am. For years, the CAB had blocked their attempts to build their U.S. route network, fearing they would become an unstoppable monopoly. This lease and stock deal was a brilliant end run around that regulation, or so they hoped. They would let National be the face of domestic jet travel, while Pan Am quietly gained a massive foothold in the very market it was forbidden from entering. For National, this is a high-stakes gamble. They are essentially inviting the fox into the henhouse, risking control of the airlines that they built from scratch. The operational details are just as complex. National's pilots, flight engineers, and cabin crews had to be trained and certified on this brand new aircraft type under the short-term contracts. It was logistically and financially a scramble. The final beautiful irony of this deal is National isn't going to just be flying unmarked jets. They would be leasing specific named aircraft from Pan Am's fleet. One specifically, a Boeing 707, proudly christened the Clipper America. It would fly for National during the day wearing its full Pan Am livery, a flying billboard for both airlines. The plan is set, and National has its jets. So National Airlines unleashes this huge marketing blitz. Ads popped up in newspapers and on billboards across the Northeast. The message is simple and powerful, proclaiming jet service to Miami in just 2 hours and 15 minutes. Nowhere in the bold print, though, did it mention that the chariots that they'd be flying would be loans from their rivals. So we arrive at the morning of December 10th, 1958. It's a cold and crisp morning in New York. There's a crowd of press, there's airline officials, and 102 lucky passengers gathered, buzzing with excitement to be part of history. Then our aircraft is revealed. Painted down the side of the fuselage in bold iconic letters was the name Pan American. And on the towering tail, you guessed it, Pan Am's famous blue globe logo. National Airlines is about to make history in a plane that is flying advertisements for another airlines. The crew, which was led by National Airlines Captain Roger Whittaker and David B. Gannon, were National employees trained for this very moment. So at 9:54, the doors are closed and 4 Pratt & Whitney engines spool up with their signature high-pitched whine. For our passengers, they're about to experience something brand new in domestic travel. Gone was the shuddering roar of pistons, and as the plane taxied, it felt impossibly smooth. Then, as it lines up on the runway, the engine screamed to full power and the brakes are released. This acceleration is unlike anything that most of these people had experienced before, pushing them a bit back into their seats. The 707 screamed down the runway and climbed at a startlingly steep rate. Their familiar bone-jarring vibrations of the aircraft of past were gone. Instead, there's a smooth sensation of ascent. Another first for a domestic route in the United States, it was quiet enough inside to carry on a normal conversation. The flight ultimately covers 948 nautical miles. The Boeing 707 cruises at just over 550 miles an hour, aimed to do the job in just under 2 hours. As the Florida coastline appears, passengers knew they were on the cusp of a new reality. And at 12:39 p.m., roughly 2 hours and 45 minutes after leaving New York, the Clipper America, under command of National pilots, touches down smoothly at Miami International Airport. But this plane's day is far from over. This is where a bizarre nature of the lease agreement snaps into focus. After a rapid turnaround, the very same aircraft departs Miami at 2:13 p.m. for a return trip, landing back in New York at 4:52. Then the jet was handed back to its owners, and that very same night, the aircraft was flown on a scheduled Pan American international flight. So it served as a domestic trailblazer by day and transatlantic flagship by night. It really was an incredible feat of logistics for the time. For the entire crucial winter season, National was the only airline that could offer the speed and glamour of jet travel on a coveted New York to Florida route. The gamble had paid off. But what of Pan American's potential plan to use this lease as a backdoor to acquire National? Well, that part doesn't exactly go as planned. The Civil Aeronautics Board, wary of Pan Am's ambitions, ultimately refused to approve the stock swap. The regulators saw the deal for what it was, a thinly veiled merger attempt that would have given Pan Am an unprecedented domestic network. Though the gambit was thwarted, they did successfully monetize their jet during their downtime, but the ultimate prize had slipped through their fingers, at least for now. As time went on, National would ultimately get their own fleet of Douglas DC-8s, and after phasing out their Lockheed Electra turboprops, they became a pure jet airliner by 1968. But our story does end up coming full circle here. In a moment of some pretty incredible irony, after fighting off takeover attempts over the years, a struggling National Airlines was finally acquired by none other than Pan American in 1980. However, that deregulation that allowed them to finally acquire National would contribute to their eventual tragic demise in 1991. Ultimately, the story of how National Airlines launches onto the domestic jet age is more than just a footnote. It was a masterclass in strategy. It's a tale of a clever underdog using the weight of a giant against itself. It was a moment born of desperation, but ingenuity. National Airlines flew into the history books on borrowed wings, proving that to be first, you don't always need to own the future, but you just need the audacity to rent it. Thank you so much for joining me on the return of This Week in Aviation History right here on AeroExploration. If you liked the video, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave me a comment below telling me what you think about the video. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time.